Hi guys, it's Hunter here with Righteous Gaming. Today we're going to be discussing what to do when you win the dice roll. We're going to be talking about reasons why decks choose to play first, reasons why decks choose to play second, and how decks interact with each other to push and pull each other in either direction. I hope you guys are excited, and let's get right into it. I want to start by laying down some ground rules for what the first turn is, just to make sure that everyone's on the same page. The first turn, or turn 0 as I will often refer to it, is the turn where both players draw up at the end of turn. This means that blocking from hand is almost always correct, and that it can be very difficult to get any significant damage through attacking if you don't have ways to circumvent blocks. If you're a new player and you're finding yourself taking a lot of damage on turn 0, I highly encourage you to block whenever possible. And if you are just sitting there mindlessly sending 3 cards every turn 0, that might not always be the best way to get value out of it. Now, the first player will generally get the following things during the first turn. They'll get an action point, they'll generally get an arsenal, they'll get a speed or tempo disadvantage, especially relevant when racing, and they'll have control over how turn 0 plays out. It's the combination of all these factors and how they interact with individual decks, both your own and your opponent's, that allow you to come to conclusions about whether or not you want to play first or second. With that in mind, let's take a look at some of the reasons a deck would have to go first. Keep in mind that this isn't going to be an exhaustive list. Flesh and Blood's full of edge cases, but it is going to cover a lot of the most prominent and some of the fun, interesting ways that you can accrue value on your first turn. First of all, and probably the most prominent in Flesh and Blood as it currently is accruing permanent value. Permanent value could mean wards, auras, anything that generates consistent value over time, like Genesis, or it could mean progressing your game state. Maybe you're playing Max and you get a Hyperdriver into play. Maybe you get 2 into play. That can be very good for you. Fang making fealty. Or it could just mean gaining life in a way that you might not have been able to do on your opponent's turn. Count Your Blessings is a good example of this. Playing CYB on turn 0 as going second can be dangerous because that costs 2 cards, so you're probably going to lose that much life right back. It can also mean presenting significant amounts of evasive damage. Traditionally, evasive damage is seen through Dominate, but you can also see it through a lot of attack reactions. If you're a deck like Azalea, like Bravo, like a warrior or an assassin who has lots of ways to circumvent blocking, then you might see some value in going first. In a similar vein to this, if your opponent's really bad at blocking, that might also incentivize you to play first. Or if you have ways to do really annoying amounts of damage. This could be things like Kodachi, making really awkward 1 damage breakpoints, or just sending a lot of 0 for 4s into a deck that plays 0 blocks and 2 blocks. Moving on to less relevant or more supporting role reasons why you would want to go first. The first would be being able to disrupt your opponent in a meaningful way. This is super powerful when you can do it. If you play Warmongers into a deck that's weak to Warmongers on turn 0, it can accrue a lot of value for you. The biggest issue with this is you normally don't have enough ways to do this in your deck. So you're gambling when you say, I'm going to go first, especially if it's just for this reason, on the fact that you will draw your disruption effect, your Warmongers, your Hypothermia. It can also be applied to certain evasive on-hit effects, like Red in the Ledger, like Spinal Crush, but same issue sort of applies, where you need a compounding reason to want to go first for these to matter so much. You can't just rely on drawing 1 of your 3 copies of the good card. Another really fun way to get value on turn 0 is if you plan on fatiguing your opponent, and you've been planning on this from sideboarding before anything happens, you can choose to go first as a deck and still meaningfully progress your game plan. If your opponent blocks you, you're getting cards out of their hand, which are effectively cards out of their deck. If you're planning on fatiguing them, that's their life total. This works especially well and pretty much only with decks where you're forcing blocks to get damage out anyways. So if you're just sending 4 vanilla damage as a Guardian or something, even though you're planning on fatiguing, a smart opponent will just choose to take 4 damage because their life total doesn't matter. But if you're sending a lot of assassin cards and things like that, that'll take cards out of their hand or deck regardless, you're looking at some actual interesting value here. Last but not least is if your opponent can abuse any of these factors on their own. Just because you can't get value out of going first, or can't get significant value out of going first, doesn't mean you shouldn't choose to go first in certain matchups. If your opponent is a deck that benefits greatly from the first turn, things like Azalea, things like Enigma, a whole host of other decks, of course, then you might want to choose to go first to deny them that value. There is no shame in choosing to go first, looking at your opponent and saying, Arsenal pass. You're still accruing theoretical value just by denying your opponent the ability to gain theirs. There are not a lot of individual reasons to go second in Flesh and Blood, but that doesn't mean there's not important ones. In particular, speed, or tempo, essentially the ability to kill your opponent first, is super important. Most games of Flesh and Blood end when one character takes 40 damage before the other one. Going second essentially gives you the first chance to hit your opponent because of how blocking on turn 0 works. This effect is more pronounced the shorter the game is, meaning it's super important in aggro matchups, but it holds a much smaller role in longer 20-30 turn grindy Guardian sort of matchups. You can also gain value through safe plays during your opponent's turn. This can look like a lot of different things, but generally it's a one-card play that doesn't leave yourself vulnerable to more damage. Once you start spending more than one card, your opponent can probably push through whatever value you get and hit you for some real damage. Things like Sigil of Solace, Agile Windup, Fruits of the Forest, stuff like that can all accrue a lot of value during your opponent's turn 0. They might also accrue value if you're going first, but why give your opponent the tempo advantage if you can get the value on their turn? There's a lot of other factors that go into choosing to play first or second and how you play the first turn of the game. I'm not going to be able to cover all of them, but there's a couple I want to touch on quickly. Hand filtering. It's never really going to be the reason you choose to go first or second, but it will inform how you play when you're going first. Take, for example, this Bravo hand. If Bravo's given the opportunity to block with 1, 2, 3 of these cards, then he'll be in a really good spot. He can generally keep a Crippling Crush and hope to draw a very good opening hand. You as an opponent might then choose that it's not right to attack with only enough damage to force 3 cards out. You would generally want to attack with enough to take 4. Or not at all. It's not always the case, but it's something to think about. Likewise, if this Bravo's going first, they might choose to only pitch to their hero text to get rid of the Spinal Crushes so that they can keep the blue and Crippling Crush without giving the opponent the ability to block their hammer and hand sculpt on their own. In a similar vein, we have Graveyard Fill. Lots of decks want specific or general amounts of cards in their graveyard. Good examples of this are Earth Heroes, Levia, Kasai Yellows, Watery Grave coming up in the next set. By attacking into your opponent on turn 0, you often give them the ability to start this game plan early. This doesn't mean that attacking is always wrong, but it's certainly something that should influence your thinking when you're choosing what to do. Now, bringing all of this together, we have to ask, how do we decide to play first or second? I've broken this down into some examples and some levels of understanding. First off, I know my deck, I know my opponent's deck, and I know how they interact. In this case, I'm Fi, and my opponent is Azalea. I know that Fi doesn't get a lot of value from going first, if any, really. But Azalea does. Azalea can get a lot of value. Fi's a deck with a lot of 2 blocks, and I know that Azalea is very likely to be able to send a significant amount of damage towards me. That damage is likely to have disruption attached, be it severe or minor. For that reason, I'm going to choose to go first in this matchup so that I can preserve my armor, preserve my HP, and stop the worst thing from happening where she blind flips a red in the ledger and I get ruined. In example 2, I'm playing Tekla Bossin. I don't know what my opponent's deck does, but I do love Tekla and I know what he does. I'm going to choose to go first because I know that I can use my action point to play Evos or to filter my hand towards Evos. I want to be able to progress my game plan, and regardless of what my opponent's doing, at least I know if I go first, I can do that. In the third example, I don't know what my deck does, I don't know what my opponent's deck does, I'm probably new to the game and just trying to learn the basic rules. In that case, I'm going to recommend defaulting to going second. It's not always going to be right, but generally, and especially if you're a new player, it's a lot easier to just block out on turn 0 and take the tempo advantage of going second than it is to try and figure out the intricacies of how your deck wants to play going first. Wrapping up, I want to leave you guys with some takeaways and some summarization of what we covered in the video. First of all, playing first is for generating value that's difficult to interact with. It doesn't have to be impossible, but it should be expected to work. Second, playing second is almost always going to be a choice for speed or tempo. Third, your opponent's game plan can influence your decisions just as much as your own game plan can. Don't forget that. And fourth, even doing nothing is worthwhile if it denies your opponent's value. This doesn't just apply to turn 0, but it's particularly important when choosing to go first or second and playing turn 0. Lastly, thank you guys so much for watching. We'd love to hear feedback from the community on what worked and what didn't, whether we missed something or anything like that. We're planning on making a variety of Flesh and Blood content going forward, including more fundamentals videos like this. So if that's something that interests you, consider subscribing. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.